Good evening. I'm going to welcome everyone to this evening's board meeting and ask for a motion to reopen the meeting.
So moved.
Commissioner Richardson, second by Commissioner Bondima. All those in favor?
James?
Richardson.
Chinya? McFadden? So I believe that is 9. We have 1 absent. Okay. And at this time, if you are able, I'd ask that you stand as we have the posting of the colors. This evening, we're changing our order just slightly, and so at this time, we will have a performance, and our student performers are from Connections High School with their director, Mr. Brandon Booth.
No, it's fine. Thank you.
Music has long been Music has long been a part of my people's culture and tradition. African villages were filled with drumming, the sound of horns, songs, and dance. Music unified the people. In music, they rejoiced, recounted their shared history, and announced their good news and the bad. The African and music were one.
The songs my people sing were theirs, the music of the Africans born in America. They were nurtured by generations of Africans who had sung them before. The call of the drum, the rhythm of the dance, the charm and the soothing of the songs were the same in America as in Africa. It was this music that sustained, encouraged, and empowered them. It was this music that took them home, home to Africa where rituals, power, joy, and life began.
God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, Thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, Thou who hast brought us thy might, let us into the light. Keep us forever in thy path, we pray. The songs of the saints was the spiritual. Spirituals came from within. They were the moans of the oppressed, the hopes of the slaves, the songs of those cruelly mistreated. They were the sorrow songs and hopes of Jubilee. Religious songs encoded messages of freedom. They had no single author. No one can date them. African in rhythm, scale, and pattern, English in language, Christian in belief.
Our people, rich in heritage, have made so many strides over the years. We frequently run into many familiar names: Malcolm X, Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, Thurgood Marshall, and of course Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King, son of a Baptist minister, grandson of a slave, marched and spoke before a global audience and dominant voice in the quest for human rights, a champion of love and nonviolence in a troubled world, a man with a dream.
And so many other important black people have directly impacted our lives. They had a dream. They strived, they failed, and they tried again. And they tried and failed again. But even in the midst of adversity, they pushed, and their triumphs paved the way for us to triumph as well. We have strong words to live by. We have
You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oils well pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries, leaving behind nights in terror of fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts of my ancestors gave, and I am the dream and hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise.
Our people rise up, and even though we have music that may exploit us, and a society that may take advantage of our innocence and hinder our progress, we're still going to make it. Our children rise up, and our people rise up. We continue to pray that we rise and hold to our precious Lord, asking Him to take our hand and lead us to the promised land.
Can we thank again the students from Connections High School? I've come to look forward to this time of the year when they come and do this presentation for us. And so, again, thank you for reminding us that we are at the close of Black History Month, although personally I think every day is Black History Day, but we do celebrate this month, so that's good. And so thank you for that wonderful way of helping us to remember that. And folks, if you've ever sung in a choir, I know there's some people up here that are musical, I hope you realize just how difficult and what talent and it takes to sing a cappella like that. And I'm just watching them, they were amazing. So let me thank first the students from Connections. We had Janelle Jordan, Makira Dingle, Takira Dingle, Naya White, Zanaya White, Kanye Saxon, Cameron Taylor, Destiny Ford, and Heaven Osborne. Thank you. With their director, Mr. Brandon Booth. Got them all? Here, good, I can stand right here and not take up any extra space.
That face held it down.
It's okay if I slide this chair? Yeah.
Thank you all again. I also want to acknowledge the JROTC from Forest Park High School. We had Cadet Ayana Martin, Cadet Inanna Sheehan, Cadet Daquan Gibson, Cadet Deshaun Sample, and Cadet Jason McAllister. So I want to thank all of the students who helped us so ably to start this meeting this evening. Oh, are you from Forest Park?
Yes, he's from
Okay, Forest Park is in the house. Okay. I won't give my news right. No. And now on a sadder note, I'm going to ask if Commissioner Brooks will lead us in a moment of silence.
Just like our old traditions, we remember. So I would like to take a moment to recognize the passing of city school employee and student. This individual was committed to supporting our students through her work. She will be remembered fondly by the greater city school community. Tonight, we send our deepest condolences to her family and friends. We regret to inform you that the passing of Mildred Armstead, who served in city schools for 40 years as a paraeducator and retired in 1998. Ms. Armstead unfortunately departed on January 9th of this year and will be missed greatly by her friends and family. And at that same time, we also want to recognize Deshauna Smith, a cherished jewel and loving student. Deshauna Smith was a third grade student at Sarah M. Roach Elementary School. She was a ray of sunshine with a bright smile. Deshauna loved coming to school. Winnie the Pooh was her favorite Disney character and also enjoyed cheerleading and reading books. Deshauna will be greatly missed by her family, school, and friends. And with that, we'll take a moment of silence. Thank you all.
Thank you. This time, if I could get a motion for approval of the prior open session minutes. Commissioner Bondima, is there a second? Commissioner Richardson, all those in favor?
Richardson.
Virginia?
Fadden.
So we have 10, and no one absent this evening. Great. And now there's a motion to approve the closed session summaries. Commissioner Brooks, is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Richardson, all those in favor?
Richardson.
Virginia?
Fadden.
Okay, we have 9 and no one absent. Thank you. It is my pleasure this evening to announce, let me get all my things together, 2 special folks who retired this past year after 30-plus years of experience in the Baltimore City public school system. First, Don England, who began work in the Baltimore City Public Schools on November 15th, 1989. She most recently served as a teacher at the Nathan A. Pitts Ashburn Elementary Middle School. She faithfully served the children of Baltimore City Public Schools for 30.21 years. Is Ms. England here? Okay, we were hoping that she would be here, but let's congratulate her. Yeah, so she's resting or she's off on a nice vacation. How's that, everybody? Our second person is Joseph Beach, who began working in Baltimore City Public Schools on December 11th, 1989. That was a good year. He most recently served as special education paraeducator for Franklin Square Elementary Middle School. Mr. Beach faithfully served students in Baltimore City Public Schools for 30.14 years. Is he here? Or are they both away on vacation? Well, let's honor him also. We do have certificates, and we will see that they get those as a commemoration of that time. You want to take those? Did I put them on? Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Again, this meeting, I have to announce that there are no donations that have been given to the system, and I will say that we will gladly accept donations on behalf of the work that we do for students. So if you are so moved, please contact Baltimore City Public Schools here on North Avenue, and hopefully I can announce some at our next session. Is there a motion to approve the personnel and quasi-judicial matters for this evening? Thank you, Commissioner Brooks. Second, Commissioner James. All those in favor?
Richardson.
Kenya? Okay, and that's 9 and no one absent. Okay. So I believe I am ready at this point then to turn it over to Dr. Santelises.
Great, thank you, Chair. Lord, I almost said Kashani because former Board Chair Kashani is sitting there, so it threw me off a little bit.
Throwing me off.
It's a good throwing off, but thank you, Board Chair Chinya. This evening, I want to take a moment to recognize the important work being done every day by our Student Re-Engagement Center. The staff's efforts to support young people in re-engaging with their education really represent an important part of our student wholeness work, and I am very pleased that our communications team is highlighting them in tonight's video. So we can play that video now.
Hi, my name is Nina Markland. Today I'm here at the Re-Engagement Center for the Career Development Fair, where students are provided exposure to future career pathways and opportunities. Let's go check it out.
What we try to do is help students get re-engaged into school and then provide them with supports around the many barriers that may have kept them out of school.
What we're really doing is trying to build a network of free training programs and get the word out to current seniors and people who have graduated in the last couple years, just to let them know that there are these really great opportunities out there that are totally free and that they're really easy to sign up for.
Hey, there's a lot of different things, a lot of different opportunities for the younger people and the youth to get out the streets more and start making better ways with their lives.
It's support for students because it educates us, you know. Without these opportunities and stuff, some people might be out there feeling lost. They don't know what to do with that. So, and this is the perfect opportunity to at least, you know, get acknowledged if you're confused on something.
We offer, like I said, a number of different technical programs. Certified nursing assistant and patient care tech are one of the more popular ones.
So finding people that you trust, that you can network with, going to events like this to have different resources and mentors. And for all my adults, all my people, even if you're not an adult, but if you're successful and you're doing good things, people who are suffering in silence need you, so we got to be there for them too. Y'all got to look for us, but we got to be present. We got to be looking for them so we can help build each other.
It's motivational, you know. It helps me strive to move forward and want to move forward, knowing that I got support, you know. So I'm just getting as many opportunities as I can before I'm left with nothing. You know, I'm like trying to get ahead of the game.
Everybody just reaches out, wrap their hands around students and work with them. And we check in on them in school as well. So we don't just put them in school. They're going to see us weekly just to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. So
Just don't never give up. Just keep fighting. Just keep pushing. everything's on the phone in place.
Over like the last couple of months, like I lost all hope in school altogether. But this job fair, it opened my eyes up to like a lot of like different stuff.
After they meet with the different partners, the different resources here, and then we do some follow-up, they can really solidify their plan, post-secondary plan, to have a clear, crystal clear plan to what they want to do next.
We're gonna get it. We're gonna get this money. We're gonna get these jobs. We're gonna be successful. We're gonna get these bachelors, these doctorates, masters before the doctorates. We're gonna get it. Let's go!
It's so great to see all the vendors here and all the students engaging. And in all honesty, just excited about the career fair. This is Nina Markland with City Schools TV. See ya! Hi, my name is Nina Markland. Today I'm here at the re-engagement.
Wonderful. And another special thanks to Roger Shaw, the entire Re-Engagement Center team, as well as Nina and the quality work of our student media team. They have really upped their game the last year and a half with videos, and so I just want to thank them for their work on this too. It is now my great pleasure to recognize an outstanding example of student leadership in a great cause. Nicholas Kopenyavong, did I say your name right? Okay, well, you can correct me when you get up here, is a senior at Poly who has been actively involved in the environmental movement since joining the Green Team at Commodore John Rogers Elementary Middle School at the age of 8. Nicholas was a member of the Baltimore Office of Sustainability's first Student Environmental Leadership Action Team, and as a sophomore at Poly, he was accepted into the Sustainability Office's Youth Environmental Internship Program. Since then, he has been an active member of Baltimore Beyond Plastic, which was instrumental in the passage of a citywide styrofoam ban in 2018. Former board chair Cheryl Kashani brought to our attention that Nicholas was honored as the 2019 Chesapeake Bay Trust Student of the Year in recognition of his long-standing commitment to the environment. And we agreed that it's never too late to recognize a great job by one of our students. So I am very pleased to welcome former board chair Cheryl Kashani, Ms. Abby Koch from the Office of Sustainability, and the Chesapeake Bay Trust Student of the Year, Nicholas Kopenyavong, who's going to teach me how to say his name properly. So I'm going to ask Cheryl if she could come forth, along with Nicholas and the full team, to kind of introduce the work, and we'll hear from Nicholas and a brief video as well.
Thanks. Great to be back. So that was the context of the work that they've been doing. And what you're going to hear tonight and then see in the short video is a case study, I think, of student leadership development. And just as we saw from the Connection students, if you give students an opportunity, they can do amazing things. But they have to seize it. And Nick is a case study in what it means to seize opportunity. Well, we're going to recognize Nick's work tonight. I also want to say that 3 years in a row, 2017, 2018, and 2019, a student from City Schools was recognized as the Chesapeake Bay Trust Student of the Year. It was sort of my fault for not thinking of it sooner to bring them forth. Claire Wayner is now a sophomore at Princeton, and Mercedes Thompson is now a sophomore at Stanford. And it's the first time ever in the history of the Chesapeake Bay Trust doing this that one district was recognized 3 years in a row for their outstanding work. So our students are being recognized around the state as leaders, and recently nationally, because there was an article in the New York Times about the styrofoam ban, and the Baltimore Beyond Plastic and our student leaders were called out in the article in the New York Times. So it's no stretch to say that currently elected officials at both local and state level call on our students to inform their opinions about important legislation. So with that, I'm going to ask Abby to say a few words before we show the video.
Thank you, Cheryl. Could I ask the whole Baltimore Beyond Plastic team that's here tonight to step up? Or just stand up? I just want to recognize that this is the full team Nick, Juno, Rachel, Maya, and Caitlin, who couldn't be here with us tonight, along with our coordinator, Joe Mary, and friend Annika. So on Thursday, I was in Annapolis with Nick, the team, about 125 other students from city schools at a rally about the bag ban, and they gave testimony afterwards. And I got an email afterwards from a teacher from Furley Elementary School, one of the schools that was out there, saying it was one of the most meaningful experiences in her 19 years of teaching, and that it had helped some of her students find their voices, thinking of what they wanted to say. And I just wanted to say that Furley and some of the other schools that were represented there, Augusta Fells, Harlem Park, Reginald F. Lewis, they're not always the schools that get the recognition, but they're the leaders doing the work. And another one of the schools out there was Commodore John Rogers, where I met Nick when he was in 5th grade. So we've been running this small grant program, the Office of Sustainability, where I work in city planning, the Baltimore Community Foundation, city schools, funding support from Constellation Energy. So we've been running it for 11 years, and thousands of students have worked on these student-led environmental projects that we fund, and Nick was one of those kids. We started bringing those students together on that Student Environmental Leadership Action Team to talk about citywide environmental issues. And I'll always remember we had the head of recycling out, and Nick was just grilling him about styrofoam and its recyclability, and he wouldn't take no for an answer. And years later, we started this paid internship program. The students chose to work on the styrofoam issue, and Nick was on the team that then City Council President Young credited with changing his mind on that bill that then became part of why a statewide bill on it passed. So I just wanted to say, Nick, how proud I am of getting to see you go from being like a playful boy who wouldn't take no for an answer about environmental issues to being a funny but also very serious young man who won't take no for an answer about environmental issues. So I'm just honored to have been on this journey with you. And now, before we hear from Nick, we're going to embarrass him with that short video. And first, you're going to see him in Annapolis a couple of weeks ago, because we went out to both the House and the Senate hearing. So we had the rally at the Senate hearing last week. This was the week before at the House hearing. And then a promotional video that he and his classmates made in middle school about recycling.
Student at Baltimore Polytechnic Institute and a youth leader at Baltimore Beyond Plastic. As my partner Juno mentioned, we are dedicated to channeling the youth voice and engaging students in the political process. 1 year ago, I sat in this very room advocating for the same topic, environmental justice. Last year, I testified for the ban on foam food packaging, which we had been working on for multiple years. This year, I'm testifying in favor of the Plastics and Packaging Reduction Act. In doing so again, I'd like to thank you all on behalf of the youth in Maryland on being a national leader and taking steps forward to mitigating the results of climate change.
Opa Greenham style. We are the people who recycle every Thursday. We can go green and show people the right way. Bottles, paper, cardboards, and cans. Keeping all of the trash off the land. The greedies outside always destroy the environment, but reusing notebooks, binders is entertainment. Reusing is a very good deed. We can go around and pull up weeds. We gotta recycle and reuse, every day. We gotta recycle and reuse, every day, every day.
Student at Baltimore.
I didn't really prepare anything, but I just want to thank the school board for honoring me today, as well as Cheryl and Abby, who's been along through this journey with me, and to think in 5th grade when I made that music video, that had changed my life. You know, I don't do any of this for any recognition or for any publicity. but it's truly an honor. And I'd like to thank everyone who's been with me, from the students who worked with me this year, the students who worked with me last year, the students who worked with me the year before that, including the organizations that helped Baltimore Beyond Plastic, accomplish everything we have, as well as all the progressive minds of the legislators who've passed all this great and needed legislation. This is really important to me because, as Cheryl has said and Abby has said, the youth were very monumental to the passing of many bills in Baltimore City and on the state level. And I think that if students are really given the opportunity to make change, then they can accomplish whatever they put their mind to. And I just ask you guys to just never give up on the students, no matter where they come from, no matter their story. I had the opportunity to intern with Councilman Zeke Cohen this past year, and he taught me that although Baltimore City may have this this stereotype where it's very dangerous and it's dirty, there's also so many beautiful things behind it. So if you guys give the opportunity to many students like myself and my colleagues, then this is just the beginning. Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments from the board? Okay, great. So what we're going to do, Nicholas, is invite you up. So I'm sure you probably have awards coming out of doors at home, but we want to add one more just as a way of saying that the Board of Baltimore City School Commissioners and I and our entire Baltimore City Schools community is incredibly proud of you. We're proud of the leader that you are now and the leader that you have yet to become. So congratulations. Is this for him also? And now on with more amazing Baltimore City school students. Our communications office has instituted a monthly recognition of a student who has reached an extraordinary level of achievement, and we call this the City Schools Superstars Program. To call our first recipient a superstar is an understatement. Taya West, Taya West is a senior at Bard High School Early College who maintains a 4.0 GPA while also taking a full load of college courses as part of the Bard model. She somehow finds the time to be an award-winning dancer with the Mid-Atlantic Center for the Performing Arts, and Taya has also received a Science Award and been nominated for Bard's Research Symposium. Finally, I am very pleased to announce that Taya will graduate from Bard this year with her high school diploma and her associate's degree. Please join me in welcoming our first City Schools superstar, Ms. Taya West, and I want to invite Taya. Taya, would you like to have a few words? There you go.
Hello, I'm Taya West. I'd just like to thank Baltimore City Public Schools for honoring me with this award. It means a lot to be recognized for my hard work, and I'd like to thank my school, Bard High School Early College, along with my dance studio, Mid-Atlantic Center for the Performing Arts, for really just helping me and always providing me with the tools that I need in order to gain these recognitions and awards. And they always help me, especially because my schedule's very busy with balancing homework and quizzes and essays with my dance, because I miss several days for college auditions like right now and competitions, but they understand in both aspects that this is very important to me to have a good education and strong grades, but also develop and improve my technique and overall dance ability. So that's all.
Very good.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from the board? Please, Commissioner Reed.
Great job. What's your next stop?
Okay, so right now I'm auditioning for colleges within the dance field, and I want to double major in dance, and either I'm thinking of physical therapy, forensic science, or photography. I snap now, but it's not really clear yet, but I definitely want to dance. And yeah, but just maintaining my dance career, but also not losing my education.
Please come back to Baltimore.
Yes. I'm also very thankful to have this award, because I will always have this as something in my career when I am recognized for anything else, or just have that opportunity to talk to students in either dance or education and say where I come from and show them that no matter what your the reputation of your city is, doesn't mean that's every person in there, and you are more than what the stereotype is of your city. You can overcome it and show that no matter what, you can achieve great things.
Wonderfully said.
Thank you.
And so, Taya, we will, both Commissioner Chinya and I, on behalf of the Baltimore City Baltimore City School Board of Commissioners, myself as CEO, and the entire Baltimore City Schools family, we are proud of you. You and Nicholas both actually represent the real Baltimore. All that other stuff is not the real Baltimore. You all are the real Baltimore. So please come up so we can recognize you. Wonderful. All righty. Moving on. That was definitely the highlight of my comments, but last but not least, I am going to, let's see. Today, the Maryland State Department of Education released two important studies. The first was the Kindergarten Readiness Assessment, or as it's known, KRA. Data shows that kindergarten readiness really can make a significant impact on the performance of these students by third grade. And longitudinal analysis of 2018-19 English Language Arts proficiency in grade 3 for the cohort of 2015 KRA test takers. I'm only looking at Commissioner Hassan because this was a question she had flagged. Reveals that kindergarten readiness actually outweighed the impact of economic disadvantage on ELA proficiency. City Schools 2019 Kindergarten Readiness Assessments results continue to show that pre-K students who attend district programs are more likely to be prepared to succeed than their local peers in other care settings. Children enrolled in city schools pre-K classrooms, either traditional or Judy Center, were anywhere from 9 to 33% more likely to be ready for kindergarten than students in other local pre-K environments. Our pre-K programs are proving effective. Only students who attend a non-public nursery school were more likely to be ready. And in addition, the readiness of kindergarten students who attended a city school's pre-K program was largely in line with statewide trends. Across Maryland, kindergarten readiness was around 47%, while 44% of children in traditional city schools' pre-kindergarten classrooms were ready, and 48% of students in Judy Center demonstrated readiness, which was above the state average. Local students who did not attend a city school's pre-K program did not display the same level of readiness. While the readiness of economically challenged students and students with disabilities increased by a full percentage point, it should be noted that our English language learners experienced a significant decrease. The Early Learning Office will be looking, I have met with them already. We will be looking into how we increase kindergarten readiness with stronger outreach to some of our ELL families, making sure that families are connected earlier to those programs within their community, as well as working to identify additional potential intervention strategies. So I will now invite Chief Teresa Jones and Christopher Wan from the Office of Achievement and Accountability to review a more detailed PowerPoint on the KRA release, as well as the four-year graduation rate and dropout. As they prepare, I will let you know that when MSDE announced the four-year graduation rates for the class of 2019, what we saw is that this year of MSDE implementing new, more rigorous graduation requirements for all Maryland students, including minimum scores for the first time in PARCC assessments in English and Algebra 1. Students now who do not meet those requirements were not immediately eligible to graduate. While we are 100% behind the elevation of those academic standards, Baltimore City Public Schools, like the state, experienced a slight decrease this year. That does not mean that the standards are the wrong standards. What it means is that we are now doubling down with some of our efforts that we've already put in place for increased support for student academic planning, a lot of the preparation that we're doing in pre-K through 8 with new curriculum and an increased focus on teaching and learning, social emotional supports, and like our pre-K data, we also noted the need for additional supports for the larger numbers of English language learners within the district who also experienced a decline. So with that, now that they are clearly settled, I will turn it over to both Chief Jones and Christopher for a more detailed discussion of both these data sets. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Santelises. Again, my name is Teresa Jones. I serve the district as the Chief Achievement and Accountability Officer, and I have with me our Research Director, Dr. Christopher Wan. What we're going to do this evening is to provide an overview of these recent releases so that we can talk a bit about the results and also capture for you some of the key highlights, particularly as we started our initial analysis and looking at the disaggregated data. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to tell us more about the kindergarten readiness assessment.
All right, well, we will start at the very beginning of the kindergarten readiness assessment with some of the key findings from this year's data that Dr. Santelises just mentioned. So first off, City Schools' kindergarten readiness rate declined by 2 percentage points from the previous year, coming down from 39% of our students being ready to this year being 37% of our students ready. And as was mentioned, the decrease in readiness was particularly large among our Hispanic and Latino students, as well as our English learner students. Although readiness rates decreased across most of our prior care groups, students at City Schools pre-K and especially those at our Judy centers, we're the most likely to be ready for kindergarten once we control for other student characteristics and demographics. Finally, kindergarten readiness has an enormous impact on reading by third grade. Students who are ready for kindergarten have almost 4.6 times the likelihood of being proficient in third grade on reading compared to students who start their career not ready for kindergarten. As a point to review, the Kindergarten Readiness Assessment, we've been taking this for 6 years now. It was first administered in 2014-15. It's a component of the Maryland's Ready for Kindergarten Early Childhood Comprehensive Assessment System, along with the Early Learning Assessment that's given in pre-K. This test is taken very early in the year, within the first month of attending kindergarten, and it assesses students' readiness for kindergarten. And the key here is not their performance in kindergarten. So when we look at school level results and see a certain level of readiness at one school, that is actually should be thought of more of as the students who are coming into that school rather than reflecting on that school's kindergarten program. The test serves as a needs assessment for teachers on their incoming students. It's one of our first data points they see, and it also allows us to make comparisons of prior care settings, which is something we really only look at in regard to this test. Since 2016-17, MSDE has allowed districts to choose to either administer this as a census assessment to all their kindergarten students or as a representative sample to a smaller subset of students chosen at random from the district. City Schools has always stuck with the census administration. We offer this test to all of our students as we believe it's an important data point to guide instruction both in kindergarten and later on in their career. Kindergarten readiness is measured across 4 domains: language and literacy, mathematics, social foundations, and physical well-being and motor development. Those 4 domains are combined to come up with one composite score, or an overall score, which is used to calculate whether a student was ready or not. There are 3 performance level descriptors: demonstrating readiness, that in other words, this student is ready for kindergarten; approaching readiness; and finally, emerging readiness. In the past, domain scores or readiness was reported on each of these 4 components individually. That is no longer the case. We now only determine if a student is ready or not based on the overall combination of all those 4 scores. There was a change we wanted to note, and this affected last year's results as well, starting in 2018-19. Now all students receive composite scores, even if limitations related to being in special education, an English learner, or other medical conditions prevent participation on certain items. So what that happened in previous years before 2018-19, those students would have been marked as not scorable. Now they are given a 0, and that affected our results and the results across the state. So just to clarify, that change happened last year. So when we're comparing our results from this year to last year, that's not an issue for this comparison, but we did want to make that known. We'll start by looking at our results versus the state. So we had 37% of our students demonstrating readiness this year, as opposed to the state having 47% of their students, a 10 percentage point gap. We had more students correspondingly falling in the emerging category and the approaching category. Here we have a view of our scores this year and last year, and we've broken out a few key groups to take a look at. The solid lines represent, in blue, city schools at the bottom, so that shows our 2-point decline from 39% to 37%. And then the state is the solid orange that has stayed steady at 47% last year to 47% this year. The dotted lines represent pre-kindergarten programs. Our pre-kindergarten programs that aren't associated with Judy Center sites had a 44% readiness. That is extremely close to the state's pre-kindergarten programs at large, which showed a 45% readiness. That is one of the smallest gaps we will probably see between us and the state. It represents we have a very strong pre-kindergarten program in comparison with programs all over Maryland. The top line represents our programs that are at Judy Center schools that tend to exhibit a higher level of readiness. They showed a large decline from the previous year, coming down from 55% readiness to now 48% readiness. When we examine how our different race and ethnicity groups did in the city, we saw that the white student group had an increase of about 1.5 percentage points. Our African American student group had a decline of 1.1 percentage points, and our Hispanic student group had a decline of about 6 percentage points. The small incline in our white students groups compared to the decline in the other two groups has caused the gaps to widen between these student groups slightly as opposed to last year. When we look at our student groups by special service status, our economically disadvantaged student group actually went up 1.5 percentage points, and in this current year, I believe the state's performance for their economically disadvantaged students was 34. So we actually, for that group, beat the state by 1.2% approximately. As Dr. Santelises noted, we saw a decline in our English learner group of about 5.1 percentage points readiness. And then we did see an increase of our students with disabilities of about 1.3 percentage points from last year. As I mentioned, one of the unique things that the KRA lets us do is assess prior care settings and how they're functioning and preparing our students to be ready for kindergarten. Here we have a breakdown of the percentage of our incoming kindergarten class that has attended different prior care settings. A large majority of our students are enrolled in pre-kindergarten programs, 69% across all three categories. We break them out individually here into city schools with and without Judy Centers, and also those who attended pre-kindergarten in other Maryland counties. We would like to see more of our kids proportionally attend pre-kindergarten because it is one of the best ways to prepare them for school, and we show that here. Here's a look at readiness by these prior care settings. We see that overall our pre-K programs, both at Judy Centers and not at Judy Centers, have higher readiness rates than the majority of other prior care settings. One exception is those who are coming from non-public or private nursery schools. They show a higher readiness rating all the way on the right there. But we know that that group is very demographically different that attend those programs than a lot of our students, especially in regard to socioeconomic status in the rest of the district. So one analysis the research team has done is to create a model that controls for demographic factors such as race, ethnicity, economic disadvantage, English learner status, gender, and then we calculate the value add due to prior care setting. And when we do that, we see that our pre-K programs, even though they displayed a slightly less percent readiness than our non-public nursery programs, once we control for particularly socioeconomic status, our pre-K programs are again more likely to prepare kids for kindergarten than the non-public nursery settings. Finally, the last point we'll make is that readiness for kindergarten is extremely important to starting off a kid's academic career. If all of our city schools kindergartners enrolled ready for kindergarten, that alone would double almost our reading proficiency by the third grade. Our estimate would be that it would come from 16% up to 29%. So just by getting students ready for kindergarten, we can see large gains in our proficiency rates once they take PARCC or MCAP in the third grade. At the student level, that translates to about students who are ready for kindergarten are about 4.6 times as likely to be proficient in third grade than those who are not.
Okay, thank you, Chris. As we transition to talk about graduation and dropout rates, I'm going to cover 3 data points in this summary. The first is the 4-year graduation rate, which looks at the class of 2019's performance.
Could you hold on, Teresa? I think
Yes.
Commissioner Frank has a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Just a couple questions. One is, I think this question may have been asked earlier by Commissioner Hassan Janes. Is there a correlation between the students who perform demonstrating, I think was the term, and performance later in years? Do we know whether that is a correlative effect? Second question is, could you talk a little about the drop-off in the Judy Center from, what was it, 55 to 48%, and what we might have learned from that drop-off? And I'll stop there.
Sure. So the first question about whether kindergarten readiness is related to other academic data points later in a student's career, it definitely is. That's really what we looked at with that analysis, where we found that students were 4.6 times more likely to be proficient on their Park third grade assessment if they're ready. So that's really speaking to, if you can get a student ready, the chances that they're going to pass assessments and be proficient on other assessments later in life increases dramatically. So that's a very strong correlation in terms of performance between readiness and proficiency later on Park.
Beyond third grade?
We have been taking the test now for about 6 years, so we could possibly track that later to 5th or 6th grade. But given some of the importance of third grade literacy, we chose to illustrate it here. But likely, yes, that relationship would exist all the way up until, I think, the graduation data point that Teresa will present in a second, once we have the data over a long enough time period to see that. Well, yes, so what we have met with, as Dr. Sangelis mentioned, with Crystal Francis and her early learning team. And what we're doing right now is sitting down with her and taking a look at, by program, what has changed from one year to the next. So Judy Centers in aggregate dropped by a large percentage, but what we want to do is figure out what school level changes or programmatic changes might have led to that overall decrease. So we're working with her on that right now.
And the other is just a comment, the slide that controls for student demographics and the other factors, how relatively low the Head Start score was surprising. But you don't need to comment more on that.
Are there other questions related to kindergarten readiness before we transition to the high school points? Okay. So the first point we're going to talk a little bit about is with the four-year graduation rate, which looks at the performance of the class of 2019. Here we saw a slight decrease from the class of 2018 by 1.9 percentage points, which leaves us at a 70.3% graduation rate. We also noted that the state also had a slight decrease. Theirs was only 0.2 percentage points. As Dr. Sangelis has mentioned earlier, we believe that some of the contributing factors to these decreases are twofold. One, as we talk about changes in graduation assessment requirements, not only do we have a more rigorous assessment itself, but we also have a more rigorous alternative to assessments, which is the Bridge program. So that program has changed in its structure, and so the students that were being considered for this particular cohort would have had to qualify for graduation based on completing one of those two requirements. The second data point is around our dropout rate. Our dropout rate increased versus last year, and that went from 15% in 2018 to 15.9%, whereas the state of Maryland had a flat graduation rate. And then as we look at the five-year graduation rate, our rate actually increased slightly to 75%, and that was an increase of 0.2 percentage points, where the state's five-year graduation rate was flat at 88.9%. As we take a look at the results over time, looking at the change versus prior year, we've sort of spoken to this already. So while we had a slight decrease in the four-year graduation rate, while we had a 1.9 percentage point decrease, the state had a slightly lower one at 0.2 percentage point change. We had a slight uptick on the 5-year, and then we had an uptick on the 4-year. So this just shows you graphically the changes over those 2 years. As we take a look over a longer time horizon, what you'll see there is our trends both in terms of the 4-year and the dropout rates. So we have had, if you look versus 2013, we have been steadily growing with the exception of this last year where we had this decrease, but we are above where we were in 2013 now that we're at 70.3%. And we've had some challenges with our dropout rate, which you see has continued to increase to the tune of the 15.9. Excuse me. As we take a look at the, the rates by race ethnicity, first thing that you'll see here is that we did have decreases across the various student groups, but those decreases were of varying degrees. The largest decrease was among our English learners, where there was a 10 percentage point decrease. The smallest decrease was among our white student population. One side note, we do know that from a class size perspective, that this particular cohort was about 240 students less than the prior class. So that demographic mix, that shift in the number of students, as well as the fact that we as a district have had a growing English learner and Hispanic and Latinx population, also is a consideration when we take a look at these results. As we look at student group data here again, looking at students with disabilities and English learners this time, as noted earlier, we have seen decreases in the 4-year with the greatest decrease among our English learner population. One side note, this takes a look at all English learners. Those are current English learners. One thing that we did take a follow-up look at was looking at our exited English learners, and interestingly enough, they actually have a higher graduation rate than even those students that were never identified as being an English learner. So one of the things that we are also digging into is how do we continue to take a look at the differences there, particularly knowing some of the characteristics of our English learner population. We do have students that are entering into that status much later, and they may have had interrupted schooling. So some of the challenges of actually being able to cross the threshold of graduation in 4 years can be a considerable one depending on where you're starting. Also, as it relates to dropout, there can also be varying circumstances there that can contribute to students not continuing on, and we are continuing to look into that as well. We made note of this earlier in terms of changes in the assessment requirements, which we do believe is a contributing factor to changes at both the state and for our district. And that was noting 2 things. As mentioned, not only in terms of the assessment itself, but the fact that there was a requirement to obtain a minimum score on the state assessment versus participation as the requirement, which was the case previously. Or if they did not meet that minimum score, the fact that they would have to complete this more rigorous bridge program as a way to satisfy that requirement. There's also a note here about those students for Algebra 1, so that only the students who completed Algebra 1 after the 9th grade were required to obtain that minimum score or complete bridge. So it's a nuance, but we just wanted to be transparent about that because it does have some impact into our reported ratings. The last thing we wanted to just top line for folks is the 5-year graduation rate. And here you'll see we're relatively flat with technically a slight increase versus last year to the tune of 0.2 percentage points. So again, just recognizing some of the challenges that some of our students experience. We do think that looking at the 5-year graduation rate is an important consideration because we just have some students that just based on circumstances find it more difficult to complete the requirements within the 4 years. And so with that steady state there and the slight uptick, that is also a sign that we are continuing to move in the right direction. So with those top line results, we invite your comments or questions at this time.
Commissioner Reed?
I have a myriad, but I'll just make it 2. Thank you, Dr. Jones. I guess 1, in terms of graduation, it's 70.3%. In terms of dropouts, 15.9. That's the median. So I guess in terms of threshold we're paying, when you look at a school or you look at the numbers and say, this is painful and this is dangerous, when you look at those schools. I mean, some schools have dropout rates above 20%, graduation rates below 60%, and I guess how do we mitigate and work on those problems?
So there's sort of a lot to your question, so I'll just give some insight. So 1, keep in mind, as it relates to graduation rate, that graduation rate is a consideration for the state's determination of comprehensive support and improvement schools. So those schools that do not graduate more than 67% of their students are automatically identified as to falling into that category, which means that they are subject to additional requirements as it relates to school improvement. And so with the schools that were identified in that first year, they have been well underway in developing their plans and putting strategies strategies in place in order to make improvements in that way. So that is an important consideration. So going back to the fact that, these really low graduation rates are not acceptable, that is a state priority, as well as a district priority for us to be able to turn those things around. The second thing is also just acknowledging that with that designation, that is an initial 3-year designation. And so while there will be consideration for exiting after the 3 years, we will continue to monitor graduation rate across schools throughout that period of time, and that there are some strategies that have been identified for use with those CSI schools that are also under consideration for some other schools that may have other challenges. The other thing I'll just note, and this was shared with the Teaching and Learning Committee, as the College and Career Readiness team also talked extensively about many of the plans and strategies that are in place there, which includes everything from developing student plans to providing increased adult support for students to help them develop and actualize those plans, which we would expect will yield increased benefit, particularly as students get that additional attention as they're planning for both their within school and post-secondary success.
Yeah, Chief Jones mentioned some of the programmatic considerations, but we're also paying a lot of attention to ninth grade, because ninth grade is where most of those dropouts are happening. Last year, we even did some small piloting that we didn't talk a lot about, but all schools in this situation have to have a ninth grade plan and have to make that transition way more intentional than in the past. Because again, if we can get students through the ninth grade, they have a much better chance of graduating. The negative part about that is you don't see the fruits of that labor until 3 or so years in the future. But it is the first indication that we're on the right track. And we just went in earnest this year. And I would say between that and the student plans that Chief Jones mentioned, those are our biggest levers right now.
Commissioner Brooks?
To that end, could you talk a little bit about some of the contextual factors that go into students dropping out, and do we follow their literacy rates, particularly around their English proficiency or the ability to read, and are you seeing differences in that way?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think what we have looked at is among our English learner students, we do see a much larger dropout rate, around 40% of our students. So that's significantly higher than the rest of the district. So I think in that student group in particular, it's probably a factor of both literacy and having difficulty reading in school, but also a lot of that population tends to arrive in high school often without formal schooling for several years, coming from other countries, and that can affect their ability to graduate on time. We know that dropout risk is similar to how we look at risk in ninth grade. So if students are failing classes, if they aren't attending school on a regular basis, if they are having incidents that result in suspension in terms of behavior, the so-called ABCs of being on track, we know that that can dramatically increase their risk of dropping out. So by hopefully controlling for or trying to improve some of those underlying variables, we could help to mitigate our dropout risk in our students. And that's really what the work of this On Track in ninth grade initiative that John has mentioned is
The other piece, Commissioner, that I will add is we do know and we do track the numbers of our ESOL students that are arriving not only to our schools later in their career, but later in their career without formal schooling. So our SIFE students, right? So coming to an ESOL class without any previous schooling experience, or for example, in a number of cases as we work with the city, we know young people have had large blocks of time where they haven't been in school because of challenges from, wherever they're immigrating from. So I think that the bottom line, what has become very clear is the need to have more refined analysis ongoing about our ESOL learners. So that piece is coming, and then I think also tracking, which the team has surfaced, how do we track 5-year graduation rates, right? And in what case or what profile of student does a 5-year graduation rate actually make more sense if you're coming with large chunks of time in interrupted schooling, still trying to learn English and adapting to higher standards, might the 5-year graduation rate actually be a more authentic indicator? But I think that the bottom line is that we definitely have a growing population. We've known this for a while, a growing population of English language learners. And so the level at which we are providing supports has to become more refined, and that's something that we've talked about, as well as our ability to track within the data.
Commissioner McFadden?
Thank you. I just want to comment on those plans that Chief Davis and I know Teaching and Learning in the Office of College and Career Readiness talked about. If it is the case for all 9th grade students to initiate those plans, and I know they do some in middle school also, I think that we definitely have to be more aggressive in monitoring those plans so that we can better support students over time. So I just wanted to comment on that. Secondly, a question maybe technically is with students. Say that a student transfers from one school to another. How does that impact a school's graduation rate if they transfer perhaps from one high school to the next and maybe they drop out from that school? Does it impacts the school that the student travels to, or are we looking at the cohort? Could you explain that a little?
Sure. So MSD calculates what's called an adjusted cohort graduation rate, and those are the data points we present here. So in your example, if a student transfers to another school at some point in their high school career, generally speaking, they will be assigned to the new school they arrive at's cohort. Now, that can become an issue in the case that perhaps that student is already off track for graduation, is already missing several years or maybe 1 year of credits. When they transfer to that new school, they will show up in that new school's data probably as a non-graduate later on in time, and it's sort of, in a sense, not fair to that school's graduation rate. That student transferred in there because they had already fallen behind before they ever arrived at their new destination.
Additionally, yes, that is the exact question, because sometimes when you see the lower graduation rates, it is a result of that, especially at our AOP schools.
And part of it is, and this is something we're working on with enrollment choice and transfer. And this is true in every school district. I mean, they're not going to name it. But what is also true is we've been also working with principals and tracking far more closely than we have in the past other push out of students. So people push students out in a variety of ways. So yes, you might have a kind of late arrival that's ESOL, but then there are people who, and we see them in some of our alternative schools. I walk alternative schools and I can find this is what is making our work more rigorous around the planning, is that for the first time we are actually back mapping where are those schools that are sending large percentages of kids to some of the alternative programs. So part of what we have done as a system that we are in the middle of rectifying is there's a negative incentive for keeping and moving kids. And so part of what we are flipping is that incentive. And like I said, I walk buildings now and I know the high schools. I ask, where were you before? Where are you now? And I think part of the beauty of the district-wide data is that we're tracking, they're all ours. They're not just your schools, they're not this school's. For me, whether a young person is at Digital, Bard, or ACE, they're all our kids. And so some of the pieces that we have been putting in place over the last year and a half are narrowing that ability to try to hide and push out kids, because we're tracking them far more closely than we have been, at least in the 10 years I've lived in the city. I mean, before that, kids got sent someplace and nobody knew where they went, and then the push out school, right, got credit for large movement, and the school that was the receiving got dinged as being a horrible school. And so now, like, one of the things, again, that we have put in place, we've been working with high schools, it's part of the planning process, it's part of how Chief Davis is looking at the data. the questions I'm asking, it's a lot harder to do that now because we are tightening up those holes that kids were getting pushed out in. And so, you could push out 10 kids and they'd go someplace else and nobody would know about it. That's not the case now. I know where kids are coming from and where they are not being able to stay, which is a different level of accountability than before when we were not tracking them.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to make a slight adjustment so that we can honor our commitment for the public comment. So there's a information and discussion item. I'm going to just, we'll do that one after public comment time, if you're following along with the agenda. So at this time, I'm just going through the consent agenda. This is not a time that we'll be voting. I'm just going to read through those items. Board members, if you wish to pull an item, please give a little bit of information as to why, so if staff needs to answer any questions, they'll be prepared. And so the first item on the consent agenda is 8.01, which is policy JKA. It is a item requesting third reader.
So we'll have to pull that to vote for third reader.
Either way, it can be done through consent. It's just that it won't be second reader but third. So,
Okay.
are you okay?
Ma'am, I'm sorry. So will there be a presentation on it tonight? Or
No.
No. So
No.
we're,
They can if you want it, but the request was to go to it.
have there been any updates to it?
Do you
for
want to, if you want to pull, let me know and we can ask them to answer those.
I don't want to pull it.
Okay.
I'm not going to pull it. Because it's coming for
Yeah.
third.
Could I add, if we don't pull it, just to call attention to the community that there's a 30-day extension on the window for public comment. So that would be the only reason
Okay.
to make that announcement. Yes?
All right. Okay. We are pulling 8.02 and 8, which is the portfolio review for Curtis Bay Elementary Middle, and 8.03, which is portfolio review for Bard High School. We are pulling those. 8.04 is a request for 2020 supplemental appropriation. And moving to procurements. 15.01, Chilmar Corporation. Is it any specific?
Same underwriting entity, but different WMBE standards. Just wonder why.
Okay. Did staff hear that? You heard? Okay. Was a question about the same corporation but different WBE requirements. Okay. So those two are pulled. 15.03, Denver Ellick. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Incorporated. 15.04, Colossal Contractors. 15.05, Commercial Camera and Security Incorporated and Advanced Fire Protection Systems. 15.06, Colossal Contractors and C&N Associates, LLC. 15.05, Five Smooth Stones Foundations Incorporated.
It's 15.07.
7, sorry.
I would like to pull that just for a quick question on the $397 per square foot rate, where that fits with our other charter leases.
Okay. So that one's pulled. 15.08, Janitorial Services. 15.09, J.F. Fisher Incorporated. 15.010, Commercial Cabling and Sound Incorporated. Yeah, 15.011, TJ Distributors. 16.01, Robert Half International Incorporated. I think that's it. Okay, so just to review, the items that have been pulled are 8.01, 8.02, 15.01, 15.02, and 15.07. 15.08, sorry,
Oh, we're not, the request wasn't to pull 1501, which is 1502, 1503.
right. I didn't,
Oh,
8.1, I didn't pull 8.1. 8.2, 8.3, okay. All righty? And did you, everyone add 15.08? And the question, any clarification for that one? Okay. Okay. Okay, was the question
10
is-
contracts, 10 firms. Why is WMB and MB so low?
Okay, so hopefully staff has heard that. All righty?
I know I'm getting to be I'm beating dead horse with this. I'm going to continue to beat it, though.
All righty. The horse is still alive, you're fine. We did skip something important that I do need to go back, and so I'm going to ask, because and to those folks, we have 4 folks who signed up, and I will get to you very quickly, but we failed to do our PEP, and I think we do need to do that announcement.
Good evening, Dr. Santelises and Commissioners. We have a few appointees this evening, and most of them are here. If you can stand when I call your name, we can recognize you. First, Carlos Maddox, an elementary teacher at Hilton Elementary School, is appointed Academic Content Liaison for Early Literacy, effective March 2nd. Tanya Crawford Williams, Educational Specialist 2 for Positive Climate Development, is reassigned to Educational Specialist 2 for Attendance, effective February 26th. Brandon Tillman, Manager of Whole Child Services and Supports, is assigned Director, Enrollment Choice and Transfers, effective February 26th. And finally, Anand Subia, Manager of IT Support Systems, is assigned Director, IT Administrative Support Services, effective February 26th.
So congratulations, and as a good segue, I want to congratulate our new appointees, as well as just to acknowledge on part of the board our students who were recognized tonight. So thank you all, and we will take the challenge and hope that you will continue the challenge, that we continue to improve and do the best that we can do. So thank you all for coming and sitting and giving us the time to acknowledge your accomplishments. Thank you. For our public comment, we start with some of our recognized groups, and I believe we have someone who's speaking tonight for the Baltimore Teachers Union.
Good evening. My name is Angela Campbell. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak today and represent my union. It's unfortunate and unusual that the presentation and proposed changes to policy JKA, behavioral interventions and student discipline, were not posted earlier for tonight's school board meeting, especially considering that the second reader for this policy has been delayed multiple times. Typically, as a union, we review proposed policy changes so that we can prepare meaningful comments that speak to the presentation at hand. We were not given that opportunity tonight. Given that, the BTU will restate some concerns we previously shared so that any changes to the behavior interventions and student discipline policy are carried out with adequate resources to meet the needs of our students and staff. My previous statement on October 29th focused on our youngest learners, and I will primarily focus on that today. Our concerns center on ensuring early childhood teachers have the resources they need to successfully meet the unique needs of early learners, ensuring that we have effective systems to identify and support early learners with social-emotional needs, and ensuring that school leaders are appropriately trained and resourced to meet these unique challenges. According to the City Schools Blueprint, our schools aim to teach academic and non-academic content, including self-awareness, social awareness, goal setting, decision-making, and relationship building. However, our schools all too often lack the resources to assist in these crucial areas. We are woefully underserving our youngest learners by not having a social emotional curriculum, such as Second Step in pre-K or kindergarten, that systematically teaches our young learners how to identify and regulate their emotions, how to solve problems, and how to cope with peer pressure. Further, continuing this type of learning throughout elementary school builds and expands on previous skills taught while connecting emotional self-regulation to learning and increasing empathy. By not having social and emotional curriculum and resources for teachers, we are missing an opportunity to proactively empower our students with skills and strategies to help them navigate the complexities of their young lives. Additionally, the district systems currently in place are ineffective when addressing and supporting the needs of our young learners. The SST process is a system the district uses to identify students that need additional support to help them be successful. However, the SST process varies widely by school, and educators across the city report that many SST referrals do not lead to initial meetings, many initial meetings do not lead to progress monitoring, and SST systems in too many schools lack consistent and dedicated focus from school administrators. This is particularly true for our youngest students, where robust SST supports could help young students turn the corner before issues grow into larger challenges and concerns. The union embraces the addition of restorative approaches to the SST process, but we maintain that the SST process needs to be prioritized by school leadership for these approaches to be successful. Moreover, many of our school leaders do not have a background or meaningful experiences with early learners. Without this foundation, many school leaders are inadequately prepared to support teachers, staff members, and young learners. Restorative conversations, when they occur, can be developmentally inappropriate. When traditional consequences for misbehavior are used, they tend to either be a one-size-fits-all solution that mirrors consequences for older students, or worse, they encourage disruptive behaviors by rewarding students with the out-of-class time and the attention they initially wanted in the first place. The latter ultimately undermines the work of teachers and staff members and prevents young learners from quickly understanding expectations, modifying their behavior, and becoming successful school citizens and scholars. Revisions to JKA are necessary, but support cannot be absent for our youngest learners. Without district-wide meaningful systemic supports for our young learners and staff, improvements to systems to identify and support our young learners, and professional development for school leaders that focuses on early childhood, it is difficult to attribute the reported significant decline in suspension numbers to anything other than a suspension process for pre-K through second graders that is more stringent. And additionally, as evidenced by our city data presented today, the majority of our students who are entering kindergarten are not fully ready. Lastly, the BTU wants to draw the board's attention to the need for a significant increase in bilingual social workers and school psychologists to serve a rapidly growing population of English language learning students. Every day we hear from teachers struggling to meet the needs of students who have often faced violence, trauma, and family separation, and who have had months and in some cases years of separation from regular attendance in schools. These needs are profound, and our current staffing levels are failing these students, which has significant implications for implementing a successful behavior intervention system. And also noted by our city data that was presented today, our students' graduation and dropout rates for this population of students are significantly higher than the rest of the population of our other students. They need our support.
Thank you. And I think just a note again, what Commissioner James mentioned, that there is an additional period of time for input in the development of the policy. So I would hope that if you want to either add your comments, give your comments to Christian here, or to get in touch with the staff, we'll be certain that they're...
Either myself, the policy review inbox, or James Torrance, who's the principal author.
Okay, thank you. I do not have any of the other groups listed as signed up for today. So I'm just looking through to make sure I don't see someone from them, but I don't believe that I do. So I will move to the folks who have signed. And for our first speaker would be Melissa Schober.
Hello, good evening. A few days ago, the National Technical Assistance Center for Positive Behavioral Intervention and Supports released a guidance document called Ditch the Clip. in which they encourage schools who are engaged with positive behavioral interventions and supports to stop using behavior charts that are common to most of us have seen, the stoplight charts, red, yellow, green. The reason cited for this is that they contribute to labeling and stigmatization of students and focus on a public correction, and the report noted that teacher and administrator evaluations are not public and displayed in staff rooms in the way that we display the behavior of children. I wanted to highlight this report based on a personal experience that I had as the parent of a middle schooler. I have a sixth grader, and in her school, the way that children and PBIS are being interpreted is that points are being assigned on an app, Class Dojo, and then students are given the opportunity to be able to have a uniform free day through this app. Now, earlier in the year, the uniform free day was assigned a percentage, 80% positive or better, or a significant improvement also given, which means that I and every other parent and all the staff and all the other children can easily and readily identify other people's children who have performed at a particular level over a set period of time. Now, Class JoJo, in terms of FERPA and protections around privacy for educational records, says that it is up to individual schools and school districts to set a policy to protect the educational privacy of children. As far as I am aware, this board has not considered public displays in which children are separated into uniform and non-uniform groups that are readily identifiable by parents, peers, and staff. And I know that this might seem a small issue to you, but let me tell you, for the developmental timing and processes of middle schoolers who are very concerned about peers, my own child, who earned above 80 and got a uniform free day, said to me, all of the kids in my grade level math class, except for me and the names of 3 other students, didn't get to go uniform free today because our class is disruptive. So children as young as 11 and 12 know who are good kids and bad kids. Parents dropping off their children know who are good kids and bad kids. And when we do that, when we stigmatize children, I think, and evidence suggests, that it leads to early dropout and refusal of school. I want to be clear that we should reward and honor students who are doing well, but stigmatizing them with opportunities that label them in the community as they're on buses with their peers from early in the morning until late in the day is not a way to do it, and apparently the National Technical Assistance Center agrees. I would strongly urge this body to think about a policy that does not stigmatize students who are trying to do their best, and think about working with social and emotional learning and support to make sure that that policy is in place for all schools and all students.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dante. Is it DeToblin?
I'm not sure.
Good evening, Commissioners. Good evening, Commissioners, Dr. Santelises, friends, and community members. My name is Dante de Tablan. I'm with the United Way of Central Maryland. And as a lead agency for our community schools effort with city schools, we are here to let you know that we are supporting the children and families in Brooklyn and Curtis Bay. This work is built upon the current work at Ben Franklin High School that brings both children from Brooklyn as well as Curtis Bay. And what we have experienced there has been an increase in our enrollment from 226 students back in 2010 to now 532 students in the current school year. And what we have been able to build at Ben Franklin High School, we are also planning to build and figure out and design with the children and families at Curtis Bay Elementary Middle School as well as Baybrook Elementary Middle Schools. So, for example, We have socio-emotional supports. Our coordinator is a licensed clinical social worker at Baybrook, for example. And one of the things that we are trying to strengthen would be those socio-emotional supports. We also have a family stability program, which is a homelessness prevention program. Because again, a number of our families that live in Brooklyn and Curtis Bay move a lot. The good news is that we have been able to see a reduction in student mobility rates at Ben Franklin High School by 16 percentage points. Now, why am I sharing these to you? I just want you to know that as an agency, the United Way of Central Maryland will be supporting our families and our children at the schools at Curtis Bay Elementary Middle School, as well as Baybrook Elementary Middle School, and will support whatever decision and you may decide, as well as what the communities may decide. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the support to the schools.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Victoria Kofer.
Good evening. My name is Victoria Kofer. I am a dedicated teacher at Baybrook Elementary School. I specifically work with our middle school population, and I'm here today to talk about some of the merger activities we have planned for Curtis Bay to really bridge the gap between the parents and the students and the staff so that everyone feels comfortable coming over to Baybrook and understanding how Baybrook is going to support Curtis Bay students. We have shared a lot of the same students throughout the 4 years that I've been at Baybrook. A lot of students, when they leave Baybrook, they go to Curtis Bay. When they leave from Curtis Bay, they come right back to us. So we have shared a lot of the same students throughout those 4 years that I know of. Some activities we've already had. We had an opportunity to meet with the principal that happened at Curtis Bay about 2 weeks ago. Last week we had an open house that occurred from 10 to 3 p.m., which allowed parents and students to come all day to our school to see our teachers in action in real time, so they didn't have to get the lip service about how great we were. They could really see in action how our school functions. We have a meet and greet coming that's going to happen at Baybrook for Curtis Bay staff to come and really get an opportunity to see Baybrook and to meet us as a family. We have Literacy Game Night happening over at Curtis Bay, an opportunity to meet them on their turf and to kind of get familiar with who we are as people. And that's more geared towards the parents and the students. We have parent orientation happening at Baybrook, where they'll get a tour of our new facilities and get a chance to see what we can offer to the students of Curtis Bay. We have a tour and art activity happening at Curtis Bay for the parents. And then later, towards the end of the school year, we're allowing the students to come over, the 5th and 6th grade students to come and just get a chance to see the school for themselves so they can understand next year, this is all of the opportunities we will have afforded to us, the opportunity to see the technology, the brand new gym, the auditorium, and different things like that. And then finally, we'll have the students come over to engage in a middle school kind of activity with the other middle school students. So they'll get a chance to build some camaraderie with the other students that they'll have at their disposal next year in class. So we've been taking a lot of specific measures to invite the Curtis Bay students, parents, and teachers in to our world so they don't feel like this is a forced kind of thing. It is a welcome thing that Baybrook is open arms. Our students, we've been talking about it with them since the first day of school this year about how we need to learn to accept new people into our building and talking about kindness and how to act towards new people. And our students have really been opening up. We've had new students coming in already, and they've really been warming up very easily to helping them understand the culture and climate of our schools and how we want our classrooms to run. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. And our last speaker is Matthew Levine.
Good evening, Commissioners, Dr. Santelises, and everyone else who's made themselves present for today's meeting. I also am a dedicated teacher at Baybrook Elementary Middle School, and I just wanted to talk about that transition and the work we're doing to make that happen. I'm also the athletic director there. My role there is to make sure that kids understand what it means to be a student athlete and to put that first. And that's something that I'm trying to use as a tool to bridge this gap between the two schools. We both have basketball teams, and we were actually slated to play at Curtis Bay this Thursday. I worked with NFK, I worked with the principals at both schools to get the game shifted to Baybrook Elementary School without it coming off as a disadvantage in any way, but more so that children, parents, and staff members can feel like there's an invitation to come to the school, to come see the space in a different capacity where the students are at the center of the stage and are in the limelight. And, beyond that, my goal is to make it easier for them to feel like they can come by and start to see the school and see what is going on and what wonderful things we have for them beyond just athletics. We have the new auditorium, the cafeteria. If you guys have come to see some of these 21st century schools, we have some amazing things that we can offer students beyond just their academics. Beyond that, I'd like to host a staff-student game where hopefully next month or 2 months down the road, the actual middle school teams can put a team together to pit against our staffs to just have a little bit of fun and, like the previous speaker said, to give them a chance to collaborate and build a sense of camaraderie in this community that really is the same community. If you look at the maps, I mean, they're the same community. We have a lot of dots that are all around that area that are traveling a really long distance to go to one school for one reason or another. And I really think that this is an action that can help fix that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so, am I on consent? And then go back to information? Okay, so at this time, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda unless there are other items that you wish to have pulled, those items that were not pulled. Commissioner Frank, is there a second?
Richardson.
Commissioner Richardson, all those in favor?
Richardson.
Chinya? I believe that's 9 and no absent already. Thank you. So now, I'm going to go look at items. We're going to put 3 items together here. 80, the ones that were pulled. 80, the annual portfolio review item, 8.02, 8.03, and I believe there's also 9.01, which is an information discussion. We'll just move right into those because all 3 of those are coming from the same source here. So, Ms. Alvarez, thank you.
Good evening. I'm Angela Alvarez. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of New Initiatives. We have a couple items that were presented during the normal portfolio process that were postponed, so we're revisiting those for a vote tonight. So the first is a grade configuration change. So it was postponed. This is regarding Curtis Bay Elementary Middle School. So the recommendation is to change the grade configuration of Curtis Bay from an elementary middle into an elementary school for school year 2021, so the next school year, and then rezone Curtis Bay middle school students to Baybrook Elementary Middle for middle school. Curtis Bay Elementary Middle School is an elementary program serving approximately 601 students. Moving the middle grades program from Curtis Bay to Baybrook will improve students' opportunities for success by enabling them to attend a newly renovated 21st century school with sufficient middle grades enrollment to support robust academic programming. Additionally, changing the grade configuration at Curtis Bay will alleviate overcrowding in the school facility, which was at 147% utilization. Both schools are ESOL schools and have experienced growth due to a growing EL population in the area. Part of what we postponed to consider was feedback that we heard from students and parents and staff during the process. Our academic office and our school's office have been working with school leadership to ensure both instruction is really strong at Baybrook, as well as that there is a strong culture and climate with restorative practices in place. Baybrook is an intensive site, which means it gets specialized support from our whole child office in terms of making sure the climate is strong. Additionally, and you heard some testimony about it, so some of the staff at Baybrook, along with our 21st Century Schools team, have been working on a merger plan with both schools to give students and parents from Curtis Bay opportunities to come together to start to build relationships, as well as opportunities to get to know the space and staff through orientations and tours of Baybrook. Additionally, we heard some concerns around the path. 21st Century Schools is which Baybrook are. The Baltimore City's Inspire program works to address safety along that route, so that work is ongoing. Students who, middle grade students who live more than a mile and a half will receive MTA passes, and we will have some additional passes available to students if needed for safety concerns. So with that, as part of the 21st Century Plan and annual portfolio review, it is the recommendation of the CEO that Curtis Bay Elementary Middle Program changes to an elementary program serving students in grades pre-K through 5, starting in the 2021 school year, and that the Baybrook zone expands to include middle grade students living in the Curtis Bay zone.
Oh, I concur. Did she say it's her recommendation?
The CEO concurred with the recommendation.
She's going to ask questions. Glad we have a thin crowd tonight.
Are there any questions? Go ahead.
Thank you. I thought that it was our practice for transportation to be provided for students outside of a mile radius, and this is 1.5 the middle grade students. So how do we come to that?
Yeah, so it's based on grade band. So elementary students who live more than a mile receive bus transportation. Middle grade students and high school students who live more than a mile and a half receive MTA bus passes. So that's per our standard policy.
Okay, that's helpful. And then, as a school, the focus is on arts integration and restorative practice and wholeness. What are some of the partners? I know that staff, based on the information that we've received, they've been working to develop the teaching staff and the faculty and the building staff in these particular areas, but I'm curious to know what supporting partnerships are there also. I know that we don't have, we have a great 21st century office, and I mean, we have wonderful people here, but we still aren't at the capacity, I think, that would completely support a school merger like this. So I just wanted to know what external partners or other partners are in arts integration partners, some of the folks that we've approved for wholeness. Are they an intensive site by any chance?
They are an intensive site, so our Office of the Whole Child works with them. I'm going to actually Perfect, thank you. So Dr. Warren's going to come up and she can answer some of those
Because
questions.
when I'm thinking of professional learning, especially when we're bringing school communities together, I just think it has to be, the support has to be intensified for the best interests of our young people. So I just want to know about it.
Thank you, Sarah Warren, Executive Director for Whole Child Services and Support. So Curtis Bay is a social emotional learning intensive site, and Baybrook is a restorative practices intensive site. So in Baybrook, the partner is Acoben, which is our sort of largest partner right now around training and coaching on RP. And then in Curtis Bay as an SEL site, they've been getting training and coaching mostly from the internal district team. They also have the student wholeness room and student wholeness specialists. So those are the main features of their work as an SEL site. I also know that they have done a little bit of work on their own at Curtis Bay to start bringing in some restorative practices, but that's not specifically as part of their work as a wholeness site right now.
And what about the arts integration focus?
So Dawn Shirey, who is our director of 21st Century Learning, does that work with the school. They have partnered them with local artists who do like artist residency, and they do lesson planning with teachers. They co-facilitate lessons. So they spend like a whole year, and they've been working on this, I want to say, for 2 years. There's I think one of the local artists does the dramatic arts, so performing arts, and then another local artist is more of the kind of like clay sculpt, that kind of art. So
I'm curious to know, I mean, we do have a teacher here from there. I don't know if it's appropriate right now. I would be curious to know how that professional learning has been going for the teaching staff. Can we?
That would be up to him. I see him, he was shaking his head in the affirmative. I don't know if either one of the teachers want to.
How has the arts integration and professional learning been going at the school? And perhaps how prepared do you feel in it? On the spot, I know, but you came for public comment, so I figured you'd like to stay a while with us.
So all three of us can comment because we're on different grade levels. But part of the way that
And
we're
can
doing
you introduce yourself for us, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Sure. I didn't want anybody to know who I was, huh? Okay. My Dr. Victoria Goddard Truitt, and I'm a teacher at Baybrook Elementary School and chair of the FCFC committee. And so one of the things that we've done is we're really looking at thinking the way that we actually define art,
Sure.
that it's an integrated part, not something that we do. It's the way that we learn. We're learning about art, the art standards, as well as meeting standards using art practices.
Yes, ma'am.
So one of the things that we're doing is we have residencies for the teachers. Excuse me. So right now we have a drama residency where the person's coming in, teaching us the actual craft, and then co-teaching us for a period of time. So that what we're doing is learning a practice that we can continue. We also have residency programs like for Wolf Trap and Future Makers and people like those kind of things. So really looking at it as an integrated whole. And also even in the way that we're addressing behavioral strengths of the students and challenges, integrating some art therapy, play therapeutic kind of practices within our behavioral health work. Now, how are you using it in middle school?
In the middle school, I specifically teach sixth grade, so we've gotten a chance to do the dramatic work with theater and that kind of thing. I found it very helpful. I feel really confident in taking it on. I've done a lot of work outside of the partnership that we did. I've been doing it in my class just about every day to integrate with the Wit and Wisdom curriculum. So I feel very confident continuing that work.
I teach sixth grade math, and I took this arts integration movement in our school as an opportunity to bring tools, construction, and ideas like that back into the classroom. There is no shop anymore. There's no metalwork anymore. I didn't have it when I was in school. I am blessed, however, to work over the summer installing windows, doing construction, and am using the arts integration to bring the scale model pieces, using ratios and proportions to actually create park benches, to create we're actually trying to create a garden bed for the pre-kindergarten so that we can have a garden at Baybrook in this beautiful space we have. So we are taking advantage of these programs, at least me in math in sixth grade, to apply it to architecture and other skills that they can take in life, and they can look at me and say, you know what, Mr. Levine, I want to use tools and I work outside for the rest of my life, or you know what, I want to pay someone to do that for me for the rest of my life. I'm good on that. So I do think as a school we take advantage of these programs available to us, and we try to hone it in our own instruction and take it further than just people coming and providing us these ideas.
And the students seem receptive.
Yes. Yes. I was going to say, the other thing is looking at the types of resource opportunities for students. Am I pressing the right button? The resource opportunities. So before we may have had, we have, of course, physical education and technology, but looking at the other kinds of resources and extracurriculum activities for students. So one of our after-school clubs actually now is actually an art club using modeling clay. We have a 3D printer, those kind of things. So
Those are
integrating
expensive.
it both in the kinds of things that students do, the kind of things that, the way they express themselves, and in the learning community. So we're excited about it.
It's really great to hear that. 3D printers, by the way, are very expensive pieces of equipment to have in any space. But I just wanted to hear that. And I think that we don't often get to, we have a large school system, this is
Yes.
one, you know, and I think that people expect for us to know about every aspect that is happening in every school. And so it's always great to hear firsthand from the folks that are working with our young people in this particular school every day exactly what's happening with the programs that we say that we have in these schools. So I appreciate you all for coming up and interrupting Ms. Alvarez's
Thank you.
presentation to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? If not, I'm going to ask for a motion, or if there's a motion.
I move that the board accept the CEO's recommendation as stated.
Is seconded by Commissioner Frank. All those in favor?
James Richardson.
Kenya? And that is 9. No opposed. All righty.
Okay. So the next action that was postponed from the earlier portfolio and operator renewal process is related to Bard High School Early College. At the time, we needed some additional information in order to finalize one of the ratings. The operator's a large entity, and so sometimes with those entities, it takes us longer to get certain information to understand a full picture. And so thus, we needed a little bit more time, but we now have all of the information. And so the recommendation for Bard Early College High School is to renew the contract for an additional 5-year term. They were rated effective in academic performance and climate, as well as in the overall in financial management and governance. They were highly effective in park performance, for both ELA 10 and Algebra 1. They were highly effective in college and career readiness. They were effective in effective programming for all student racial ethnic groups. They were rated effective in programming for students with disabilities as some of the key highlights. Therefore, it is the recommendation of the CEO that the contract of Bard College to operate Bard High School Early College Baltimore be renewed for 5 years for a term that commences on July 1, 2020 and ends on June 30th, 2025.
I concur with the recommendation as stated.
Are there any questions, comments? Okay, if not, we have a motion.
I move that based upon the consideration of the recommendations and rationale of the CEO, the operator renewal report, the testimony given at the operator-run schools work session and public hearings, the contents of the official record, and the factors listed in policy IHBJ and administrative regulation IHBJ-RA, that the board accept the CEO's recommendation as stated.
Is there a second? Commissioner Reed, all those in favor?
Richardson?
Chinya? That is 8 with 1 absent. Okay. So that one passes. Just to remind folks that there is specific language that we have to use. That is why you're hearing the scripted language right now. So thank you.
Okay. Next, it's a new consideration, so we'll bring this back for a vote at the last meeting in March, which I think is the 25th. So we're sharing a new recommendation. This is related to Calverton Elementary Middle School. The recommendation is to reconfigure the grades at Calverton Elementary Middle from a K-8 to a 3-8 next school year, in school year 2021, which is a year earlier. So the board in 2017 had already approved changing the configuration of this school to align with when it moves into its new 21st century building. The program serves about 358 students. Since they've been in swing space, which is in the West Baltimore building, which is a little bit of a distance from their permanent location, their enrollment, particularly in the early elementary grades, has dropped considerably. Mosher, which is also in swing space in the Garrison, has also seen a little bit of a decline in their enrollment as well. And so the recommendation is that we change that configuration a year earlier. And the reason why we're bringing it at this time is it's been a challenge that the school's been working through. We're in budget season, and it became particularly challenging in order to be able to staff. So remember, schools are staffed on a per pupil basis. And so like when you look at the enrollment, it's so small in kindergarten and first grade that it makes it really difficult for the school to be able to provide all of that is necessary. So we're recommending that the board move up that change so that it happens next school year. This map kind of shows their permanent locations, and the arrows are to where the two schools are located in swing space. When schools are in the 21st century swing space, students receive bus transportation from their school sites to those locations. If you accept this early change, we would not change Mosher. Mosher will wait until the building opens, so it'll continue next year to serve the entire array of elementary, so pre-K through grade 5. This is just a change related to Calverton, and it impacts roughly 25 current students.
You said this will come back to us.
Yep, so you'll vote at the end of March.
At the end of March, okay? Any?
So how are we going to, with the change coming, kind of in the middle of the year, how are we going to ensure a smooth transition for these students, and do we have the capacity to do that now? I know there are 2 schools planning to open in the fall also. I'm not sure if any of it is would be impacted by this. I'm just curious to know if the transition will be smooth, and what is the plan around that to ensure it if we approve this?
Yeah, because this is a relatively minor change, like most of the students in those grade levels are actually not attending the school currently. Again, it's small, it's below 10 students in each of those grade levels. And so that's a pattern we've seen dropping. So families are already deciding to do something differently while the schools are in swing space. And because this is a 21st century school, in terms of making sure that families can get to their bus locations, there's a whole process around orienting families to the bus stops and to monitoring that throughout that first few weeks of school opening. And, there's like a whole process that's already set up. So this would feed into that. For the school, and it's easier for them to be able to ensure continuity of academic programming because this allows them to fully staff. They were faced with potentially having to have 2 grade levels per class, which is not ideal, and particularly not ideal with the curriculum that we have for students. So this ensures that the students are getting a better academic program that's not going to be lessened. But just like with anything, we will continue to meet with families. As these are 21st century schools, those meetings are ongoing to hear concerns and to prepare, so that this will just funnel into the work that's already planned, that already has to happen. That's part of the transition, and so that will just continue.
Thank you.
And just for clarification, this would occur, this change from Calverton would occur for the
Yeah,
school year
for
that
fall.
begins in the fall.
Yep.
Right, okay.
That's right.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to go back and finish our last information item, which is the Maryland School Survey results, and then we'll move to procurement for our last item.
Good evening again. Teresa Jones, Chief Achievement and Accountability Officer.
And Chris Wan, Director of Research.
Chris, are you newly Dr. Wan? Or have you been Dr. Wan?
I have been Dr. Wan since 2008.
Please
Medical
forgive
Dr.
me.
Wan.
I don't think we've ever referred to you as that, and maybe if we have, I just forgot, so please forgive me.
Well, you're welcome to start.
Yes, Dr. Wan.
Thank you. All right, so we're here. It's been a busy month for OAA to review the results of the Maryland School Survey. So this is the survey that was part of the Maryland State Report Cards that were published this past December. So as an overview to our presentation and summary, the Maryland School Survey was administered for the first time in spring of 2019. So these are our first set of baseline results. The results went into the calculation of schools score on the Maryland State Report Card. That's used to assign their star rating. Our results varied by topic. Some of our higher scores were in the categories of substance abuse, student and staff relationships, behavioral and academic supports. Our lower average scores were in physical environment, student-to-student relationships, and physical safety. Another key finding that results showed a lot of variation by respondent group. Elementary students were generally more positive than our older students in middle and high school, particularly on the substance abuse and behavioral academic support domains. And our educators were generally more positive than students when we compare them domain by domain. Our educators also reported generally more favorable results than other educators in the state of Maryland at large. So as an overview to the survey, this was administered operationally for stakes in spring of 2019 for the first time. It was administered to students in grades 5 through 11 and also to educators. So a key point here is that elementary students really just are surveyed in grade 5, which is actually a small fraction of the overall elementary school. And that's because of developmental ability to take the survey. Middle school 6 to 8, and then high 9th through 11th. Instructional staff were, and we'll call those educators throughout the presentation. Those are specific codes, teachers, and paraeducators. We're also invited to take a separate survey called the Educator Survey. Survey was done all online. It was translated in English and Spanish for students. An important point we want to call out is that this was used in the Maryland Report Card. So this was a survey that was designed for an accountability purpose and identification of low-performing schools in the state of Maryland. So that's very different than other surveys, which might be given more for a general feedback purpose. This one is tied to accountability. So in a way, your responses matter for a score or a star rating for your school. The survey overall counts for 10 out of 100 points that are in the report card calculation. 7 of those come from the student portion and 3 from the educator. City schools participation rate was about 70% for our students and 77% about for our educators. Those are lower than the rest of the state, which typically saw response rates on the survey range around 90%. The results for the survey, both for students and educators, are reported on a 1 to 10 scale, with 1 representing the least favorable response levels and 10 the most favorable. The Maryland School Survey is broken up into 4 domains: community, environment, safety, and relationship. Within each domain, there is a set of topics. In most cases, community, environment, and relationship, there are 2 topics that correspond to those domains. Safety has twice that number, with 4 topics falling into the safety domain. For educators only, there is an additional topic, the quality of instructional feedback. Students do not answer that. So there are 10 total topics for students and 11 for educators. We're going to take a look now, domain by domain and topic by topic, to see how our results from the survey compared to the rest of Maryland at large. So just as a reference point, the 1 to 10 scale, the midpoint of that is 5.5, so that kind of represents the point where it's, in between favorable and not favorable. So the first domain we're going to look at is our community domain, made up of 2 topics. The first is respect for diversity. That is a domain that tries to assess how students feel they are being treated fairly, respectfully in terms of their race, ethnicity, gender, cultural background, or family income. Our score on that across the district was 5.2 in comparison with Maryland's 6.0. Second topic in the community domain, participation and engagement. That's the degree to which students feel there are chances to participate in class discussions and activities, as well as school-sponsored events, extracurricular activities, and school rulemaking. So that's a very broad set of participation activities that it's looking at. Our score there was 5.4 compared with Maryland's 5.6. The second domain for our students is environment, looking at, again, 2 topics, behavioral and academic supports. This is also a broad domain that looks at the degree to which students feel they receive social, emotional, behavioral, and academic supports from adults at that school. So it's really across all those different categories. Our score there was identical to the state at 6.4. Second topic in this was physical environment. That's the degree to which students feel the school is kept clean, comfortable, and in good repair. Our score there was 1.8, which is low on the spectrum. But also Maryland's overall score was also quite low at 2.6. Our third domain is safety, and this one has 4 topics in it. The first one is physical safety, the degree to which students feel physically safe at school. And it also asks questions about fighting or vandalism, theft, and damaging of other property. We have circled this category as well as the bullying one. These are the 2 that we stood out with the largest differences between us and the rest of the state. So for physical safety, we had a 2.1. Maryland had a 3.5. So that's more than 1 full point difference. Bullying, likewise, was a big difference between us and the state of Maryland. We were 3.0 versus Maryland at 4.5. Emotional safety, our third topic, is the degree to which students feel happy, socially accepted, listened to, and a part of their school. We were 4.9 versus 5.4 for the state of Maryland. And lastly, substance abuse, degree to which students believe other students think it's okay to use alcohol, drugs, or tobacco while in school. Our score there was a 7.1 versus Maryland at a 7.5. Finally, the fourth domain, relationships, students to student relationships. Our score there was on the lower end of the spectrum, 2.2, compared to Maryland's 3.1, which was also fairly low. Staff and students relationships were rated much higher. Our score was 6.4 and Maryland was 7 even. In those results, those are really the averages across all grade bands. What we wanted to take a look at was also how some of these scores vary by the grade bands used to calculate scores in the Maryland report card. What we see generally, and we've highlighted these in bold, are that elementary students tend to have more favorable opinions across most of our topics than middle or high school students. There are some exceptions. We see several 4 of the domains are higher in our high school: physical environment, physical safety, bullying, and student-to-student relationships. We do see some interesting patterns, like in the case of substance abuse, that reflects the difference, of course, among age groups. We see very high score in elementary students, and that declines from 8.9 to 6.6 in middle, and then ultimately to 3.0 in our high school grades. One last look at the student survey. Again, this was for the purpose of accountability, and the student portion of the survey counts for 7 points on the report card. So here's a histogram or a distribution showing how many of our schools earned each of those points. What we can generally see is that most of our schools are falling right around that 2 to 4 points earned out of 7. And that there's slight declines as we go from elementary to middle to high school on average.
Thank you, Chris. So now we're going to transition and talk a bit about the educator responses. So this slide summarizes the responses for city schools educators versus Maryland educators. And what you'll note here is that with our blue bars, that's city schools. Generally speaking, in most areas, our scores are more favorable than the state of Maryland. The key exceptions to those would be for physical environment, physical safety, bullying, and substance abuse. As Chris pointed out, because this is used for accountability, we also wanted to show how the distribution of ratings as relates to the 3 points that this would be worth on the survey. So what you'll see here is more of a normal bell curve distribution that shows that in this case, most of our schools were getting somewhere around 2, and to some extent, a sizable number between a 1.5 and a 3. Excuse me, 2.5. Chris also sort of mentioned this in terms of the dynamics. The dynamics do play out differently. So like with students, it played out differently by grade band. As it relates to educators, we do not have data by grade band, so it is all grades combined. But what we do see is that educator responses are generally higher than student scores. There is a little bit of a watch out here. So while the domains may be titled the same, the questions are not exactly the same. So what it tells you about what those responses mean can be a little different. So as an example of that, we're going to talk a little bit about the bullying as well as the substance abuse, where you'll see sizable differences between the educator responses and the student responses. So if you take a look at the topic description for bullying, for students, that particular topic is intended to help us understand the degree to which students feel other students are teased, bullied on, or teased, picked on, or bullied, cyberbullied, etc. For educators, it's the degree to which educators feel staff are teased, picked on, or bullied, whether bullying or cyberbullying is a problem among students, and whether staff stop observed bullying. So it takes into consideration a lot more than what the student responses tell us. Similarly, with the substance abuse descriptor, you'll see for students, it's intended to tell us the degree to which students believe other students think that it is okay to use alcohol, drugs, and or tobacco while at school and can do so without getting caught. For educators, it is the degree to which the school has adequate resources and supports to address and prevent substance abuse. Substance use. So I point that out because one of the things that we have advised folks as they're taking a look at these results for the very first time, that while they don't have access to the actual questions that were used on the survey, it is important to actually look at the topic description to glean the significance to which those ratings are indicative of what could be considered favorable or unfavorable circumstances in a school. This next slide is intended, again, just to acknowledge that with this being a new component of the Maryland Report Card, we also want to make sure folks were aware of where to access information about it. So this is basically calling attention to how to navigate the state's report card website in order to pull up the information, as well as the help guide that corresponds to the survey results. Also, before we wrap up this evening, I also just wanted to make folks aware that in today's State Board meeting release, there was also an update for additional information on the State Report Card site. So I know for some time we've been talking about the fact that we don't have the ability to compare schools along the lines of demographic characteristics. Well, the state did provide updates today for what they're calling similar schools comparison reports. So those also are available on the report card website. Essentially what those reports do is they will give you how a particular school performed along the 4 different indicators represented on the report card, and compare that to what they consider a comparison group, which looks at 4 different demographic characteristics, which includes race, ethnicity, economic disadvantage, English learner status, as well as students with disabilities. So that's just an important consideration for folks to be aware of, since that does provide more insight around how schools are performing relative to other schools across the state. However, I do want to note that it does not at this point indicate that there are intentions of factoring that into the actual calculation of the report card ratings. That is still a level of concern for us as a district, and we are continuing to follow that very closely to see to what extent can we influence that going forward. And with that, I will ask for comments or questions from the board.
Yeah, I see Commissioner James, and then I saw Commissioner Frank.
All right, thanks for this. Wondering if there's been any traction in the state, or if we're looking into triangulating this with the Youth Risk Behavior Survey data for reliability?
Yeah, that's great. So the Youth Risk Behavior Survey we take every year as part of a CDC effort. So I haven't heard any plans from the state, but I think that's definitely something we would want to look into once we have those results.
I asked Dr. Shaw the same question.
Oh, okay.
Just so a little loaded, in that I think, and her response was, no, they're completely disconnected. There's nothing in common. But the Youth Risk Behavior Survey is asking about substance use and perceived use of
particularly
peers
that
and
one.
school safety. And I just would wonder if students are taking a school safety survey in a school, if they might be answering differently than if they were taking the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. So.
And I think that's important to note that, again, this is for an accountability purpose. And we often see when surveys are used for accountability purpose, people realize that they are going into a star rating and the results can change over time. So, yeah, somewhat different fundamental purpose of each, but we should take a look at that.
And that crosswalk just might help inform practice.
Sure.
So, thank you.
Can you just explain again the degree to which and how the results of the survey are factored into the report card?
Sure. So the report card overall is built out of 100 points, and this survey accounts for 10 of those. So essentially, it's like 10% of the score used to determine your star rating.
Okay. And this being the first time, we don't necessarily know how principals and educators and others might use the information from the survey. But have we given thought of how to use the information, how to guide principals and others about how this might be useful, or are we setting up another situation where we're teaching to the test, where we know this is going to be administered next year, and we're going to try to teach to essentially better outcomes of the survey?
Great question. And so where we stand is, again, to the point that this is the first year of us getting the results, and the fact that we don't have some of that level of detail around specific questions. Basically, what we've advised folks to do is to take a look at the domain information and consider this in part a starting point to triangulating what is actually going on in your school alongside other types of data that you may have. Partly because this is being used for accountability purposes, we don't want to make too many assumptions around whether or not this is like the end-all be-all in terms of what this survey results are telling us. And so it is something that we're going to be continuing to monitor with this being the first year, to see to what extent are those conversations happening, to what extent does that factor into some of the decisions that are being made around school performance plans and focused efforts, particularly considering some of the overall ratings that we've seen around the safety components, bullying, and some of those things. I will also just point out for what it's worth, when we previously had a district-administered survey around culture and climate, there were some similar themes in some of those survey questions that in some ways we had a pretty similar type of response where we knew that there were some challenges in our schools. So I will tell you that just in talking with some principals, they've said looking at these results, it wasn't hugely surprising in some cases. It was sort of what they would have anticipated, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that they don't take that seriously around their charge in terms of trying to improve the culture and climate within their schools. I think the other important note for us as we think about this district-wide is the fact that there are a considerable number of initiatives underway that are intended to improve the environment, the culture and climate in our schools, the facilities with the 21st Century program. So some of those things, this data sort of speaks to and verifies that some of the challenges that we've been trying to address for some time are still playing out in terms of the experiences of what students and educators are experiencing in their schools.
Go ahead, Commissioner Brooks.
Yeah, so thank you for that. I'm interested in sort of Martha mentioned the youth risk behavior survey, and so my question was more specifically about sort of the absence of gender identity and sexual orientation in this survey when it is present during the YRBS data. So that was an addition that was made well over several years ago, maybe like I think maybe in 2010. When I was working alongside organizations sort of doing advocacy to get that added to the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. And so one would love to hear some commentary about that, given that it's working with our population of students. So we know that there are LGBT students in Baltimore City Public Schools. We know that there are harassment that's happening. We know what the drug abuse and sexual risk behaviors are based on this federal data, and yet at the district level, like I'm saying there's a gap. And so I'm interested in figure out like systemically from your perspective on the research side, like how are you beginning to sort of be engaging that process?
Again, another great question. Because for what it's worth, in terms of the survey results, we don't have that defining information to be able to disaggregate the data that's being provided by this state-administered survey. So I think part of your question leads me to wonder like whether there should be conversations with the state to see to what extent is that something that can be considered for future iterations that might help us better understand that. But short of that, we've not added now an additional survey to try to get at this because the state is administering this survey and we've been sensitive to how do we avoid duplicated efforts, knowing that surveys take up a lot of time and we have a lot of different activities going on in schools. So I think that would be something that we would have to take back and give some thought to in terms of what is it that we want to understand and what might be some other ways for us to do that in a way that allows us to gain insight, but perhaps not add in an additional administrative burden of administering yet another survey in order to tease that out. But I certainly appreciate you bringing that to our attention because there are other potential data sets that might help us understand that. So maybe some of the qualitative data, the intake information around bullying, some of those things, where we could look at the data differently in order to understand those circumstances.
I also think that there are a couple questions around that, perhaps on the respect for diversity domain, but also maybe on the bullying domain. One of the challenges is that the actual questions on the survey, which is about 50 items, have not been released publicly. Keeping in mind that this is an accountability survey, it's being viewed in a lot of ways like an assessment. Like we wouldn't release the questions to the park exam publicly. So we haven't been able to really report out individual question responses. But one difference is that I think there were additional questions along those lines added to the older grade version of the survey for middle and high school students. But that's something we can follow up on with the state. And I think there's a good reason to continue the advocacy efforts to have more questions like that on our school survey.
So I did notice that there was a shift in sort of, I think, student relationships or the perception with when they got to high school, it was a drop, and I forget which part that was. I was wondering if you all could talk a little bit about, I think the relationship between the student-teacher relationship at that high school level that we might need to think about a little bit more and sort of the context surrounding that.
Yes, I think there's a lot of additional follow-up questions we'll need to dig into around this. So it looks like for the staff and student relationships, our elementary schools scored a 7.2 on that, and that was down to 5.5 when we got into high school. So whether that is a difference due to actually having, let's say, more poorer relationships in our high schools, or is it just a difference in opinion that could perhaps be due to age? We do see, generally speaking, high school students are giving kind of across the board lower responses. So I think the way to follow up on that would be through some of our qualitative data, going out and trying to figure out, is that happening, and really try and understand the nature of that relationship, or where are students coming from. We need to ask additional questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I know for most of what you all presented tonight, it's our first sort of glance at some of this, so I know there'll be a lot of still digging, as you said, more into the data and what it might mean for the system as well as individual schools. So we'll keep looking. Thank you. We're going to move now to the procurement, and there were a couple of items that were pulled for some questions. So the first two were 15.01, 15.02, Chilmar Corporation, and Commissioner Reed.
Yeah, at first, I'd like to thank you guys for the great meetings we had, I think, last week in terms of discussing some of the issues and also the improvement in terms of the printout. I guess my question is pretty simple. For Chilmart's the vendor for two institutions, same type of contract, but they're different WMBE goals. Why so?
Director of Operations, John Land.
John?
So these are two, yes, it's the same vendor, but it's two different types of work. One is a HVAC cooling system upgrade, and the other is a new system, a vertical packaging unit. So that difference is changed, makes a change in the available subcontractors that are in Maryland.
Then could we get a motion for 15.01, 15.02? Commissioner Reed, is there a second? Commissioner Frank, all those in favor?
James Richardson.
Kenya? Reed, I think it's still 9, correct? Okay. Then we had a question on 15.07, 5 Smooth Stones Foundation.
Yeah, my question on that is, the $397 per square foot, is that market rate? How do we determine market rate for rentals to charters? And how do we make sure that we're being consistent, or as consistent as we can, balancing facility quality, facility maintenance requirements, and the different providers?
So that square footage cost is not a market rate. It's well below a market rate. But it's from data that we use, utility data, our maintenance data to do repairs, preventive maintenance in buildings, and our snow removal cost, lawn care costs that we aggregate and then divide by a square footage from the district at the district level, and then that yields this rate. And we use this rate in all of our charter contracts, or our leases.
So you use this rate or that formula for all the charter contracts? So
we use this rate.
So $397 a square foot is universal across every charter contract lease?
I'm going to defer to
Okay.
Greg Gamble from our real estate office.
Perfect, thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Gregory Gamble from the Office of Real Estate and Permits. No, that rate of $397 is consistent with the charter contracts that came after 2015. After that, they were pretty much standardized, so everyone from that point on, they all have the same rate.
Perfect, thank you. I appreciate it.
I have one slightly different question about the same item, and because this is this is one of the schools that I believe has a conditional. We passed the conditional based on getting a permanent place, and so this is the lease for just this year. And part of my question is, I mean, why are we now approving the lease from? I know you're going to give me the right answer, but why are we now approving the lease from July 1st for a place that's only going to last through June of
Well,
this
there was
year?
a series of unfortunate events that occurred prior to them moving into PDC where they were before. There was a fire in the building, and that kind of disrupted everything in terms of them moving and getting in. And then once they finally got into PNC, then the operator experienced a medical emergency that took him out of being at work all the way up until the beginning of school. So it's like we couldn't negotiate with him because he was not around to be able to negotiate the terms of the lease. Then when he did come back, then we were able to negotiate the terms of the lease, and then when it was finally signed by the operator, then we ran into the Christmas holiday.
And so I just Greg, and so one of the reasons why we still move forward through it, even though there were a number of things that happened that delayed the negotiations of it, but for audit purposes, we want to make sure that all of our charter schools have a formal lease. So even if it's a very short period of time.
Okay.
And so while these various back and forth were happening, we made sure that they were under a temporary permit so that they can have access to the facility. But this is just making sure that we meet any audit findings also, even though it's a very short period of time.
Okay, and so I'm assuming payments were being.
Exactly. It's still the same
being
exact
made.
process.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, is there a motion?
I'll move approval.
Okay, Commissioner James, is there a second? Commissioner Bondima, all those in favor?
James Richardson.
Chinya? That's 9 in favor. Thank you. And the last one was 15.08 janitorial services.
Yeah, I just want to be educated a little bit. Sorry for being asleep at the wheel when we went through the acceptance last year. But we have a $10 million contract. I guess it started at 9, it's up $1 million. You have 5 legacy contractors, and I guess 5, in flux contractors. And I guess my point is, we have things like ERP last week. Last time we talked was ERP, and it was a situation where you had something highly technical, highly defined, where it's hard to bring in an MBE or WMB. This is a situation where you have a $10 million contract and you have janitorial services, which looks to be the low-hanging fruit. So you have low-hanging fruit of $10 million, and you say to me, I can do 20% MBE and 9% WMB. This appears to me to be the opportunity to do the ceiling in terms of what you can and do in terms of minority business. I mean, I could be all wet, but in May of 19, I missed it. But this time I scrubbed it a little bit. It's like, why? We got 5 firms, new firms. Why can't 3 or 4 of those firms be minority?
I've got it. My name is Michael Smith, MWBE consultant. When we reviewed it this time around, it initially was 17%. We increased it to 20%. We looked at the opportunities that the MBEs that are available, as you call it, the low-hanging fruit, and we saw with more MBEs available, so it was increased from 17 to 20% MBE participation. No, that's percentage we're talking about. Percentage of participation.
May I ask a question? So the 20 and 9%, that applies to the subcontractors themselves, correct?
Yes.
So each of them are required to meet 20 and 9.
Each of them will try to meet their goal.
And how many of the primes are minority?
That I don't know.
We don't have that information?
No, I don't have that information available. but I will definitely get that information to you. No, I'll have to check to find out how many of the firms that are actually MBE or WBE firms.
What does the asterisk next to the name of the firms represent?
The asterisk means it's a new vendor for city schools.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, is there a motion? Yeah.
When you send us, at least to me, I can't speak for the rest of my commissioners, can you send me the details of those 10 firms in terms of their makeup?
Whether they're MBE
Whether they're
certified
MBEs,
firms.
yeah, the structure of the firms, what's their makeup in terms of minority, and what are they doing with us in terms of minority business?
Just ask a clarifying question. Can you also make sure that you forward to the board what the MBE, WBE analytic point is for each of these? Because I think part of the other question that I'm hearing emerge is if it's not, like, when is it actually the firm, right? Whether it's a firm, or whether it is just, I'm assuming, subcontractors or some other division, right? Like, the board needs clarification, as I would assume the public would. If we have a shifting metric for the definition of that target, then we need to make the conditions under which a particular definition is applied clearer.
And I've asked this question before, whether, on your point, Dr. Santolis, whether we allow primes, minority primes, to count towards the MBE goals. It's really not clear, because what we have here are 10 companies, some of which may be minority, but what we're doing is subjecting each company to the WB goals, which is standard.
They can self-perform 50%.
So, okay, but we don't know which of these are minority firms.
No, I don't.
So we don't know which of those would self-perform.
No.
Versus sub it out.
That would be part of the review once they submit their
We
information to
should
us.
know at this point whether any of these are minority firms.
Now it's up for a vote. This is not the application process, correct? So, like, I understand at the beginning of the process why you wouldn't know that, but I think it's, part of the flag is that it's odd to reach this point in the decision-making process and not have a breakdown of whether it's some subcontractors or full organizations. So if we don't typically do that, then I think we need to talk about making sure that information is tracked all along, because it shouldn't come to this point of a vote and not be able to break down that data point. Do you understand?
Yes, I understand.
Okay, great. Yeah, exactly. Like, by the time it comes up for a vote, it shouldn't be mystery data as to whether we're talking about subcontractors or firms. So we need to revamp whatever that protocol is to make sure that that data is clear, and then the board won't need to ask for it. It should be part of the backup visibility into the definition of MBE and WBE being used.
Got it, we'll make that happen.
Great, thank you. Please, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think the question you just brought forward was exactly what I was going to ask, but I have another question, and it's not really a question, but first I want to thank you for all the work that you've done and some of the information that you did submit for us today in reference to our conversation at the last board meeting, in reference to documentation. But anyway, other question I've asked before, when you have completed the job and the work is done, do you have, I was never really clear on this, do you have a system whereas you would get the information on if they really, if the companies really brought in the percentage of minority contractors as they had indicated on their agreement? Do we have a system to check and see if that actually was done?
Throughout, we'll go through a procedure with the payroll. Typically, when some contract is on a monthly basis, we'll look at the MBEs that were approved and if they have been paid on a regular basis and the amount that they have been paid. And the red flag will go up for us if this is 1 year into the contract and the MBE hasn't received any funds at all. That would clearly be a concern for us. But typically, we review it on a regular basis. Once the paperworks come to our office, we'll look at the MBEs, make sure it's the same MBEs that were approved initially, make sure they are getting paid on a regular basis.
So when that's done, do we rehire this company contractor to do our work if they do not comply with the agreement? How do we handle that?
Hi, Joe Vogel, Interim Director of Procurement. We have what we call liquidated damages in our contract. So if a vendor does not meet those goals, there's a formula for that, and we do go after them for that amount.
At least that was part of the question that I heard from Commissioner Von Diemen.
That's correct. The MBE office looks at them on a regular basis, monthly.
But I got to point out, in sort of your defense, your office has 1.5 people to do the upfront and the back end and the monitoring and the enforcement. So we can only expect what we're investing in terms of the office in order to achieve all of these important goals, including the monitoring and enforcement. And so the equivalent city office probably has 6 people, and we know the choices the district has to make. And, I can't weigh in on the judgment of the choices of what we have in terms of our ability to enforce and monitor, but it's not something that is easily done with a small staff.
I just want to, and I agree with you. But when we're talking about large sums of money, when we talk about trying to comply with the laws and rules and regulations that we have to, then we have to think of a system where we can get that information. We have to, because we're not talking about a little bit of money, we're talking about quite a bit. So I understand what you're saying, but there's still laws that govern how we should handle it. And we want to always watch out for Baltimore City Public Schools and make sure we're in compliance of following the laws, policies. So we have to think of a way to make sure that we do this.
And I know as a part of some of the conversation that we had, even in executive session, we know that some movement has been made in terms of reviewing this, and more will be happening. We've heard some more this evening, so I think we can monitor to see that piece is in place, coming through the direction of the new legal officer. So I think we're on the right track, and I hear what everyone is saying. I want to be certain that we get back to the procurement item and what your pleasure is for this particular item for this evening. So is there a motion on this item? It's moved by Commissioner Richardson, seconded by Commissioner Frank. All those in favor?
Richardson.
Chinya? Okay. Opposed? Okay, so we have 8 in favor, 1 opposed. The item passes. Gentlemen, thank you. I hope you've heard the requests that were asked, though, for this item. Please do see that those are forwarded for folks to see, and thank you for that. Okay. Committee chairs, I know that your reports are written, but if any of you have anything additional you'd like to add from Operations Committee? Okay. From Policy, Teaching and Learning? Okay. Did you want to do anything from MABE? Okay. Then I'm going to give you the notice of upcoming meetings. Is that where I am? All righty. Teaching and Learning Committee will meet here in the boardroom on Tuesday, March 3rd at 3:30 p.m. Our next executive session is Tuesday, March the 10th at 3 p.m. The public meeting will be on same day at 5 p.m. The Operations Committee meeting will be on Tuesday, March 17th, 10:30 a.m. here in the boardroom. Policy Committee, March the 17th. Commissioner Von Diemen, is there a second? All in favor, just raise your hands. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Have a good evening. Thank you, everyone. I see your hands out there. Thank you.